Now, I must start by saying that cities are great places. I mean, cities are engines of economic growth. We are having more cities. We need more cities. We must have more cities because cities contribute to our economic growth. Cities contribute to innovation. Cities are places where a large amount of social and cultural interaction happens and all sorts of things. But at the same time, it's city or cities where most of the pollution are concentrated, right? From greenhouse gas emissions to waste generation to water consumption and all sorts of activities or let's say externalities that produce negative impacts are also associated with cities, right? And so the contribution of cities to climate change is huge, and that's why we need to stop some of these negative impacts from happening. And as I said, transportation contributes a great deal. Something needs to be done. The other thing that I want to also focus on before I get into the real challenges, well, this is a challenge, is that we all know that car ownership and car dependency, right, car ownership and as well as car use is growing significantly across all Indian cities, not only the bigger cities, but also the smaller cities. Why is this happening? Because of income growth, and this has been happening for a while, right? More affluence, population growth, suburbanization. We call it sprawl or whatever. Cities getting bigger, and all of that results in more purchase of cars and more use of cars, right? And we also can't deny that we're having cheaper cars and all sorts of subsidies for car travel. Believe it or not, cars are subsidized. Petrol and diesel prices are growing and all of that, but in general, car travel is cheap. Why? Because we don't have to pay for parking, for example, everywhere we park our car. Parking is mostly free in Indian cities. Congestion is not priced, right? We often get into congestion and contribute to congestion, but we don't pay for the costs that congestion imposes on society. And therefore, the real costs of car use, ownership and use are much more than the out-of-pocket costs or even time costs that we pay for car travel. And this growth is happening among many other countries. India, China, and several other countries that are on the path to economic development, rising incomes, and all sorts of things. They're contributing a great deal to this car boom, if we may say. Right? Why is this a challenge? Because our dependence on car and growing car ownership is resulting in air pollution, fossil fuel consumption, rising fossil fuel consumption. But some things that we don't talk about enough are social, exclusion, and also disruptions to communities that happen because of our building of infrastructure to support cars, right? More roads, wider roads, more flyovers, better highways, better urban highways, and all sorts of things also cause a whole lot of disruption, right? And congestion. There are a large number of studies that tell us that the more we build, the more congestion we encourage. Right? We have never been able to build our way out of congestion. Whenever new capacity is built, the capacity gets consumed within a very short time. Why? Because of mode shifts. People purchase more cars because there is more capacity. People make shifts in time. People travel at different, more convenient times of the day. People take different routes and so on and so forth. And therefore, we can't really build our way out of congestion. As travelers, but also as planners, city governments or others, as well as the private sector, mobility service providers and others, are most important in solving the puzzle of how can we get from point A to point B faster. We're talking about speed, and speed is about mobility. How can we improve mobility? That's the predominant conversation that we're having. But we don't talk enough about, for example, how do we get there fast, but in a way that doesn't increase, but in fact reduces the negative impacts of travel, reducing emissions, for example. And we also don't talk about how we can achieve this faster travel or better mobility in a way that doesn't disproportionately impose costs on one group by benefiting another group, right? So that gets us into equity, because believe it or not, there are many places in cities, there are many cities where not having a car is a problem because you can't access as seamlessly the many different opportunities or activities within cities that you desire, right? So how can we get far, from point A to point B fast, but also by addressing these issues of reducing impacts, more an inclusive and an equitable transportation environment, and so on. Key to that is that reducing car dependence or reducing motorized travel dependence is absolutely important for achieving our sustainability agenda. We can talk about electric vehicles, but nonetheless, reducing motorized travel is absolutely key. So that gets us into, how do we get there? What are some of the solutions that are out there? The first solution, again, based on my own research and based on, the research in the field of transportation planning and policy in general, what we know, and I'm not going to the details of how do we know, but some of the recommendations out there, which I personally agree to, and I think is absolutely important for a country like India. The first is we need to think about creating walking and bicycling infrastructure in cities. We absolutely need to invest and think about and plan for walking and biking infrastructure in cities. And this is a serious affair. This is not just a bike lane here and a good pedestrian infrastructure there. We need to think about an interconnected, integrated network of biking and walking and bicycling infrastructure. Huge benefits. The direct benefits on health and physical activity, the health benefits of physical activity are unimaginable, right? And that those are well documented everywhere. The second is to build better and more public transportation systems. Our cities, not only our bigger cities, but our smaller cities that are transitioning into bigger cities, we absolutely need better public transportation. And better public transportation doesn't necessarily mean we have to build metro rail. We can even build and procure better buses, right? Have our buses run on time, design networks in a way that connects public transportation systems to places that require public transportation in order to fulfill their, or conduct their daily activities. So planning for public transportation systems and networks in a meaningful way is absolutely, absolutely important. But at the same time, we need to think about how we can encourage more people to use public transport. A large proportion of Indians use public transport systems, but our problem is not only to getting people out of cars into public transport, but also restricting attrition of existing riders from the public transport market, right? If we can't build better public transportation infrastructure, we're going to lose existing riders. The first opportunity that they get, as incomes rise, they're going to purchase a two-wheeler or a car, and that is happening. That is a problem in our country, which is unique compared to many other countries. So we need to restrict public transport patron attrition, right? And it is actually simpler than we think, because as I said, we don't need trains and metro rail. Buses are extremely flexible. You can change routes all the time, right? By time of the day of the week, you can flexibly design networks and so on. But not only do we need to think about how we design our networks or to reach places where people are going to use, but also we should start designing or reorienting our cities around transit. And that gets us into transit-oriented development. I mean, the term is used very, all too often, but transit-oriented development is absolutely key, right? Which is essentially, how can we think about placemaking, urban design, good landscape design, architecture, and all of that around public transport stations, mixed use, dense developments, dense in a nice way. And that's where the importance of designers come in, right, around public transportation stations with mixed use, residences, commercial, and all of that, so that people who live there are able to access a large number of opportunities within close distance, live work arrangements, shopping near where you live. Connect those places around transit stations with good quality walking, bicycling opportunities so that people use those facilities and a large number of daily requirements are served that way, reducing the need to travel in the first place, longer distances. Third, what is important is we must think about how we can address or stop, reduce our subsidies to car travel. And what do I mean by that? Parking cannot be free. Parking can never be free because, again, there's a large amount of literature and evidence that shows that parking is not free. Somebody's paying for that parking. In fact, those who do not own a car are also paying for that parking. And therefore, parking charges are absolutely important. In fact, in many places, in many cities, we are going the opposite direction. We need to do a course correction there. And we need to ask ourselves, why should parking be free? It skews travel, it encourages car use, and so on and so forth, right? And we also gradually need to think about congestion pricing. It's high time that we think about congestion pricing along certain corridors in certain parts of cities. There are many cities around the world that we never believed are going to think about congestion pricing, are thinking about congestion pricing. And what does it do? It again encourages us to use our transportation system more responsibly. And just reducing car subsidies cannot happen in isolation. We have to, the funds that we may be able to generate from parking fees and from congestion charges need to be reinvested in good quality public transportation infrastructure, good quality non-motorized infrastructure, and so on and so forth. The next thing that we need to do is we need to be committed to regulations and policies to promote cleaner travel. And we are doing a lot there, absolutely. I must say that we have done that. And what do I mean by that? Cleaner fuel and vehicle technologies. We need to, we are now in the BS6 world, right, as a country. So that's a good thing, right? Those kinds of initiatives would reduce harmful tailpipe emissions, right? So cleaner fuel, better technologies of cars that reduce emissions. We need to be committed to our electric vehicle program, right? Again, there are many problems to solve, infrastructure requirement for charging and all of that. A large amount of research is happening. We must be committed as a country to aggressively move towards our electric vehicle agenda, and we are basically doing that quite effectively. And the third in this bucket is about fuel economy standards, and we do have a national agenda to impose fuel economy standards as well. So so that the car can go longer distances with the same amount of or volume of fuel, and that is also going to be helpful for as the sustainability agenda of our cities. The next thing that I wanted to, as a solution that I want to talk about, is the importance of seamless multimodal transportation. So seamless door-to-door travel using a variety of modes that may be managed by and operated by various different agencies, public and private. That's where we are going. And you would hear the term mobility as a service, MaaS. They would fit into this whole idea of basically seamless multimodal transportation through an environment which is entirely shared, and that can reduce our reliance on personal motorized vehicles. Suburbanization and suburban sprawl that we are currently experiencing is an issue, and therefore the importance of prudent land use planning must be emphasized, right? We need to think about it. And what can that, compact cities, if we can achieve them, as I talked about, reorienting cities around transit lines or along transit lines, densifying meaningfully station areas and all of that, those are all part of how we can plan land uses of cities towards the future. And that can have major impact on lowering the total number of motorized trips, the total amount of travel, the vehicle kilometers traveled overall. And how can it do that? By bringing activities closer to where people live, right? So that we travel less overall and we can shift from motorized to non-motorized for a larger portion of our trips. And finally, what we need to think about and not ignore is the importance of plugging in accessibility gaps, which is that we must think about and consider that there are places within cities that are underserved by public transportation. And we need to absolutely identify those places and provide good quality transportation for those that, let's say, cannot own or afford to own and operate cars. We need to consider that. So equity, inclusive, these are important words in transportation planning, especially when we're talking about sustainability. We also, finally, really, we talk about the case for case. That's a buzzword that we often hear. What's the case for case? CASE basically talks about, connectedness, right? So connected. A is accessibility, accessible, right? S would be shared. So the more shared, increasing the share of shared transportation. And E is electric, right? So, connected, accessible, shared, electric. And to that, I will add non-motorized. And if we can achieve that, and governments, government planners, government policymakers, as well as the private sector mobility service providers and technology providers, all have a huge role to play so that we as travelers can travel in a way that not only helps us, but helps others and the environment, society.